Yeah.
Here's a seat
We've
for
been
you.
working on.
You're gonna sit randomly wherever you want to sit.
COVID itself kind of threw our. Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
If I can get your attention quick, if you haven't grabbed lunch, you might want to grab it right now. Summer. Okay. And I just want to do a quick introduction of our speaker today. Thanks, everybody, for coming in person and joining us via Zoom. We're super excited to have you all. And our presenter, John Lynch. He is the 5th president of Three Rivers, which for over 40 years has served design-build commercial clients and industrial maintenance customers with the hallmarks of safety, quality, and value. Previously, John spent 26 years in public service to the Michigan communities of Midland, Big Rapids, and Coldwater in positions ranging from planning director to city manager. 2005, John was named Leader of the Year by the Leadership Midland Alumni Association. He received the Midland Area Chamber of Commerce Chairman's Award in 2014, and in 2016 was named Michigan's Outstanding Community Administrator by the Michigan Association of Planning. The Midland MIPROS Group recognized him with its Stewardship Award in 2018 for his role in mentoring and developing young professionals. So there's so much more to say about John. He is our ABC Chairman of the Board this year, and I'm super excited to have him on today. So thank you, John.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's nice to meet you all. This is going to be a little, I apologize for speaking from behind you, but this camera's at the front of the room, and we're going to work with that to the best of our ability. And I apologize to those who are logged in online, so I have to turn my back to address the room. Having done that, let's very quickly, let's go around the room here so I know who we're talking to. Just tell me your name and what company you're with. And
Summer Weiss, Three Rivers.
Jared Limits, MDL Construction.
Peggy Brown, Greater Michigan Construction Company. Carly Purdy, GMCA. Kayla Stryker, Twin Lakes Task Force.
Nick Practice, Plume Service Company.
Garrett Irish, MDL Construction.
Angela Mattering, ABC.
Greg.
Greg Morales, ABC Building.
Jeremy Rogers, Arbery Insurance Agency.
John Sheridan, Sunbelt Reynolds.
Dustin Newmeyer, Three Rivers Corporation.
Hannah Dubois, MDL Company Management.
Drew Loomis, MDL Property Management. Jared Stoutberg, MDL.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. And then folks, I know we've got a number of folks online as well. So, all right, so these things are always, I think, measured in terms of their value by what you get to take home. And I know that you're all ensconced in your lunch at the moment, but I think that I'm going to provide you with a few tools that you're going to find useful the moment that you walk out the door. And so I'm going to ask you to write a couple of things down. All right, so get out your pencil and your paper if you would, and we're going to write down 4 things. The first one is discomfort. Discomfort. All right, the second one is battle damage. The third one is presence. That's with a C, not a T, not like Santa Claus. And the last one is alligators. And this all makes sense to you here as we go on. So you should have discomfort, battle damage, presence, and alligators. And over the course of about the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce you to a few people. We're going to introduce you to a fellow by the name of Abraham Wall. He's a statistician. A fellow by the name of Charlie Slemon. He's a former Canadian Air Marshal. Chris Langen, who's widely viewed to be the smartest man in the world, and Robert Oppenheimer, who ran the Manhattan Project during the Second World War. So from there, why don't we kick off? Why don't we begin? So if you'll advance the slide, please. I've got a question for you. I normally start these things with a question. Today's question is, go ahead, Kathy. Do you have the courage necessary to take responsibility for inventing the future? Now let that soak in for just a second. Do you have the courage required to own shaping the future? And that's really what we're talking about here today. Go ahead. let's talk for a moment about what leadership is and what leadership is not. Leadership is an experiential art. By that, what I mean is it's something you have to do. It's something you have to practice. And it really involves identification of intelligent action. It's really figuring out the what needs to be done. Go ahead. It's about creating capacity for results, helping people get things done that they really didn't know they had the capability to do, and making sense of diverse perspectives, helping people see things that perhaps they didn't see before. Put all that in a bucket, and that really is what leadership is about. Right? And leadership is hard. Leadership is hard. It's hard for a variety of reasons, but one of the core reasons that it's difficult is that there are two fundamental requirements of the leader. The first one is part of your job is making people uncomfortable. It's also part of your job to make sure that people feel safe, physically and psychologically. Go ahead. In terms of making people uncomfortable, growth and comfort rarely coexist. Go ahead. The highest rate of individual growth happens when you're farthest from your comfort zone. Therefore, it's your job to make people that you're working with uncomfortable. It's your job to help them grow and evolve. Conversely, the flip side of that very same coin is recognizing that when people feel safe with the others that they work with, they perform at their highest level. Employee safety is an accurate predictor of both employee engagement and the quality of work that they produce. So these things are at odds with one another. How do we deal with that tension between these two fundamental principles, discomfort and safety? Well, you have to focus on civility. Demonstrations of civility are most strongly associated with effectiveness in leadership. And demonstrating respect is the most important quality to get people engaged and committed to what they're doing. I would ask you, how much training have you had in how you treat people with dignity? You know, do you actively think about how you treat people with dignity in terms of getting work done? Most people don't. Therefore, discomfort. Discomfort. It's your job to find that balance between discomfort and safety for the sake of enhancing performance and development in the people that you're working with. Leadership is also hard because we're the problem. You know, it's hard to say, but we're the problem. Now, I congratulate all of you for being here today. When you invest in yourself and your own skills and capability, that's awesome. But you know what? We're the ones that need the most work. Leaders are judged by the results that they produce. And emphasis on results, unfortunately, can push leaders to focus on the wrong things, to focus on the metrics versus the people that are producing those results. The stark reality is that you are they. I would encourage you to listen actively to the people that you work with. Whenever you hear the they ought to do this or they ought not to do that, those folks are talking about you. You know, whether you want to accept that or not is an entirely different deal. But anytime you hear that they, you own a piece of that. And unfortunately, change and alternative blindness are real things. Those are things that we have to combat proactively. We have to think about. Leading is also difficult because the demands on the leader are relentless. They're never ending. You have to be decisive, not divisive, decisive. It's required that you get things done. You make decisions, but decisions come with risk. You know, there's an accountability for making the right decision or the most effective decision. And unfortunately, speed and accuracy don't normally go together, right? So you have to get it done ideally, efficiently, and quickly, but it's hard to make things happen in this environment. Let's go ahead and see if you can kick that video clip on.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Get it?
The answer is 13. But Did you see the moonwalking bear?
Who saw the bear? Watch the screen on the right. Watch the screen on the right. There he is. Center screen, exiting screen left. Go ahead. Take that off. Right, it's easy to miss something you're not looking for. When I talk about change blindness, alternative awareness, this is the kind of thing that I'm speaking about. You have to proactively accept that you have your own biases, your own beliefs about what you think the answers are with respect to getting things done. And you might be right, but you might not be right. And until you can embrace the notion that you might not be right, you're going to miss things that could be very important. So here's another question. What's the difference between a leader and manager? And we could spend an hour on this topic alone, but I'll say this. Leaders have followers, managers have subordinates. That is the fundamental difference. Leading is difficult because very often management and leadership are confused as the same thing. And I assure you, they are not the same thing. They're not even close. Many times we misplace value on measurements when we talk about leadership and management. We mistake metrics for a vision of the future, and metrics and measurement are important, but they're not a vision. And we tend to reduce individuals to statements of talk about what leadership is not. Leadership is not management. Management is nothing more than exercising authority and oversight of the essential. Power is conferred upon you as the manager to perform a service to bring forth order. If people with authority meet the expectations of the authorizers, the system works pretty well. Success is driven by the understanding of what's expected and how you get it done. But exceeding the scope of the authorized authority will usually put you on the outside looking in. You want to know if you're leading or managing, just think about if you do something without asking for permission, what's going to happen? You know, if you're going to be curtailed in your activity, probably you're managing and you're stepping over the line of your sandbox. Authority has a defined scope and it's conferred upon people other than the managed, right? So the difference between leadership and management, leaders have followers. Followers decide. You know, being a leader is not about a title. It's not about a formal role. It's sometimes you don't even get to decide. You might not want to be the leader. But if the followers say you're the leader, if the followers seek you out and come to you for advice, you're a leader. And that is an amazing and magical thing. Being a manager, on the other hand, means somebody else gave you this authority and now you're responsible for a group of people. Those are subordinate employees usually. And they had no say in whether or not you're the manager. That doesn't make you a leader. You can be a manager and not be a leader. So management and leadership are very different things, not to be confused. Management relies on securing compliance with the rules, but rules don't lead to an ethical culture unto themselves. Rules do nothing more than explain to people how not to get punished. And if you're not careful, you can be really good at managed adaptive decline, which means things are going bad, things are going sideways, but you're doing it in a very graceful, organized way. So on the surface, it looks like you're getting things done while the ship is sinking. Nobody needs that. That's not leadership. That doesn't happen. Let's go ahead. You probably are familiar with the McKinsey maxim. McKinsey's a business consulting firm, international firm that specializes in this statement: what you can measure, you can manage. And they've made a fortune looking at organizations and telling them you're organized in a vertical manner and you should be horizontally oriented, or you're organized in a horizontal manner and you should be vertically oriented. But it all boils down to, what are you measuring, right? Well, measurements are tough to deal with when you're talking about people. People don't subscribe to measurement very well. All problems are people problems. All issues are people issues. If you don't believe me, right now in this room, there's a thermostat on that wall. What's that number say? On the thermostat right there. 74? All right, 74 degrees. Some of us are perfectly comfortable. Some of us are a little bit chilly. Some of us are a little bit warm. That number is 74. It's indisputable. It's measurable. It's empirical. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, at that location, it's 74, right? But what does that mean to us individually? Different things to different people. It's tough to subscribe measurement to people. Metrics mistakenly become conventional wisdom if you're not careful. For instance, gross domestic product of the United States goes up every time a cow is born, but goes down every time a child is born. So gross domestic product, for example, being an accurate measure of economic strength, has its own weaknesses. You have to understand the weaknesses of measurement in order for them to be meaningful. And measurements lag. The future is not measurable. Wrap your head around this. Think about driving your car with last week's information, last week's fuel gauge data, speed data, engine temperature data. Doesn't do you any good if you're working today with last week's info, right? So measurements have their own weaknesses. Now they're important, no question, but when it comes to leading, you have to understand what the weaknesses of the measurements might be. This is where battle damage comes into the equation. These are photographs that were taken of the US Air Corps bombing equipment during the Second World War. During the Second World War, air crews, bomber crews specifically, were required to fly 25 combat missions before they were released from combat duty. 25 missions. Out of every 100 airmen, 45 would be killed in action, 8 would become prisoners of war, 6 would receive life-changing injury, and 41 would either have light injury or be unharmed at the conclusion of that 25 combat mission requirement. Go ahead. Planes would come back to the airfields looking like this. Go ahead. Or like this. And the Air Command, at that time, it wasn't the Air Force, it was the Army Air Corps. And the English Air Command said, we've got to do something about this. We can't have the air crews getting torn up like this all the time. You know what we need to do? We need to armor the planes. Now, the job of these planes is to carry bombs. Bombs are heavy and armor is heavy. And so there was concern that if you are not judicious in the use of the armor, you're going to limit the combat capability of the aircraft. So the idea was to figure out where best to place the armor to protect the air crews while preserving capacity for the planes to do their job, which was to carry and drop bombs. Abraham Wall, that fellow there on the left, was a statistician who fled Nazi-occupied Austria in 1939. In 1940, he went to the English War Department in London and said, hey, I'm a statistician and I'm willing to help you in any way that I can. So when this problem came up, he was assigned the task of figuring out how to judiciously place armor on airplanes. And so for 3 months, he and a crew of people would go out to these aircraft when they returned, and they would chart all of the battle damage. And you see an illustration of that here on this slide. The idea was, if we can figure out where the planes are most frequently getting shot up, we can figure out where to put the armor and conversely where not to put the armor. But after 3 months of this kind of work, Abraham had an epiphany, and he realized that he was collecting the wrong information. He was collecting data from aircraft that made it home. And what he really needed was data from aircraft that didn't make it home. So ultimately, he was able to overcome his change blindness or his alternative blindness and realize that this was not a good path. And they figured out where to place the armor and they put it on the aircraft, and their survival rates went up. In fact, they went up far enough that they changed the minimum required combat missions from 25 to 35, but that's another story for another day. Point here being, you got to be like Abraham. Keep your eyes open. Understand that there might be an alternative out there that you're not thinking about. All right, let's shift gears here just a little bit and talk a little more about why leadership is difficult. Leading is hard because we have to exercise judgment. Now, judgment in and of itself is not difficult. It's usually pretty easy. Judgment's nothing more than making a call about the relative value or merit of a choice, usually good or bad, A or B, plus or minus, you know. Often we think about these in terms of right and wrong, but in reality, you know, decisions are rarely that easy. Usually we're confronted with almost right or probably wrong. So judgment errors are things that we have to guard against. They can be confused with confirmation bias. You know, if you have this mindset of my mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts, you know, you're automatically headed down the wrong path. We are also limited in our own understanding of what other people are thinking. You know, a classic error is to believe that when you look at another party, whether it's an employee or a customer or a partner, subcontractor, you think you know what's in their head. You know, that's a huge mistake. You don't know what's in their head. What you think you know is based on your own experiences and your own range of issues. So judgment by intellect is only part of the truth. It's only part of the way that we get there. Facts help us alienate and isolate people. Remember, all problems are people problems. And so when we start ticking off the facts and focusing only on the things that we can measure to inform our judgments, we're leaving out a huge component of the process, the people part. And it's human nature that when we've made up our mind about how to do something, we rarely fail to find the facts that we're looking for. Now, here today, we're having lunch together. If we were not having lunch together, I would have brought with me a bunch of bananas. And I would have handed a bunch of you a banana. And I would have asked you to open the banana. And 90% of you would open the banana from the stem. Human beings, the only animal on the planet that open the banana from the stem. Every other animal opens the banana from the point. And believe it or not, if you flip it over, you pinch it with 2 fingers, it pops right open. You don't smash the top of it by twisting the stem down and all that sort of thing. Works great. How is it then that at 50 years old, I have no idea that opening the banana from the point is even an option? The reason is because we rarely fail to find the facts we're looking for. When challenged with the problem of how do you open the banana, you know the answer, it works for you, so you stop looking. You stop looking. You have to keep your eyes open to things that may misinform the judgments that you're required to make. This brings us to Charlie Slemon. He was a Canadian Air Marshal back in the 1950s and 60s, so he ran the version of the Canadian Air Force. Now, back in 1960, a nuclear missile launched from Russia could get to the United States in under a half hour. And October 5th, NORAD radar in Thule, Greenland, indicated that a massive nuclear strike was coming over the horizon from Russia with 99% certainty. So they quick rang up the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Wyoming, which is a military installation buried deep inside a granite mountain designed to survive a nuclear attack. They called them up and said, hey, we see this thing coming over the horizon. At that moment, the defense situation condition of the US military was at status 4. It's a range of 1 to 5, 5 being the most relaxed condition. And it went from 4 to 3, from a heightened state of alertness to an attack being likely at that very moment. At this point, there's 20 minutes to impact. So the duty commander, Colonel Robert Gould, calls up the NORAD commander, General Lawrence Cutter, to find out what to do. It happens, though, that General Cutter was on a plane flying to Washington and he could not be reached. At this moment in history, in-flight telephone calls were not a thing, and they literally couldn't communicate with him. So we're at Defense Condition 3. It's a very tense military situation, and at that moment, the U.S. Air Force is ready to launch their own missiles and their own bombers in under 15 minutes. Oddly enough, 15 minutes to go before impact. The second telephone call was placed to Charlie, our guy. He's second in command now at NORAD. And they have refined their radar image to say, we can say with 99.9% certainty that this attack is coming over the horizon. Now, at this moment, Charlie has the authority to tell the Airborne Alert Force from the Strategic Air Command, which is a group of B-52 bombers equipped with nuclear bombs, to go attack somebody. Under these conditions, he individually has the authority to tell them to go. He's wrestling with that authority in this moment as Defense Condition 2 is implemented, and US military across all branches is preparing for imminent conflict. 8 minutes to impact. At this moment, the Chief of Intelligence for NORAD, Brigadier General Harris Hull, gets on the call and tells Charlie, hey, I'm here. How can I help? What do you need from me? And Charlie goes silent. Silent for almost a full minute. Can you imagine under these conditions, almost a full minute, nothing? Because he's thinking. He's thinking, he's concentrating on what he knows for sure and what he doesn't know. And he asks the director of intelligence, where is Nikita Khrushchev, who at that time was the leader of Russia? And it turns out that Nikita Khrushchev was attending a conference with the United Nations in New York City. But for the fact that Mr. Khrushchev was in New York on that day, Charlie probably would have ordered the launch of the missiles and the bombers. But at this time, thinking this through, he said, it's very unlikely that Russia is attacking us while their leader is here. And so they de-escalated the situation. And obviously there was no nuclear attack. What the radar image saw in 1960 over the horizon was a rising full moon. The technology at that time was just a little wonky. It did see a thing, but the radar signals were bouncing off of the moon back to the receiver. It was seeing the wrong thing. And so when it comes to judgments and the way that decisions get made, even under the most intense of conditions, under the most trying of situations, it's important to take a deep breath and concentrate on what you know for sure, not just what you think you know. The banana can be open from both ends. So with under 6 minutes to go, Charlie saved us all. All right, I got another question for you. Are you a good storyteller? I hope you are. Leading is difficult because the story has to be good. And most people make decisions on the basis of their social identities or partisan alignments in politics versus a realistic examination of what's going on with them. When people don't have complete information, they tend to make up what they don't know, and they bring to the table information that most aligns with their views of the world or their own value systems. They bring information with which they are comfortable. We tend to make decisions based on momentary feelings versus sound understanding of the fact or how things will benefit us or hurt us. So the story has to be good, but the storyteller has to be better. Confident people are more convincing than people who are not confident. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, but I would suggest that you are. This is a well-known condition that says less intelligent people are incredibly confident. In other words, you've encountered folks in your life who are often wrong, but rarely in doubt. Those are folks who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. Often wrong, but rarely in doubt. Now, there's another law here that's important for the leader, and that's Parkinson's law of triviality, which says people will put more effort into something trivial versus something complicated because they more readily understand the trivial than the complicated. In other words, when you're explaining, you're losing. When you're explaining, you're losing. So often wrong, but rarely in doubt on one end of the spectrum, and if you're explaining, you're losing on the other end of the spectrum. That's another natural tension for the leader that requires conscious navigation. This is where our buddy Chris Langan comes in. Chris Langan, widely held to be the smartest man in the world. He began talking at 6 months old. His IQ is measured to be between 190 and 210. That's 30% higher than Einstein's IQ. He taught himself math, physics, Greek, and Latin, all by the time he was 7 years old. But he's an independent scholar. He doesn't work in a think tank. He doesn't work for a university. He's worked as a cowboy, as a construction worker, as a forest ranger, as a bar bouncer. And he's also written extensively on the cognitive theoretic model of the universe. Interesting fellow. I also would introduce you to Robert Oppenheimer. He's the guy that ran the Manhattan Project. That was the science behind the creation of the atomic bomb during the Second World War. Robert was a physicist educated at Harvard and Cambridge. His parents were very well educated, and so was he. But he was terrible in the lab. He had poor research skills, and he was known to be affiliated with the Communist Party. He was appointed to lead the effort in spite of the fact that he was known to be an affiliate of the Communist Party.
Can't be that smart.
Well, Langen was kicked out of Reed College because he missed a financial aid form. This would have been his freshman year. His family was very poor. He grew up in an abusive household, and he had a very difficult time interacting with other people. So he got a scholarship to go to school. Smart guy, right? Gets a scholarship, goes off to school, does his first semester, goes home for Christmas break, comes back and finds out that he neglected to complete a form to extend his scholarship. So what's he do? He packs up and he goes home. He says, oh, okay. And he leaves. He learned to accept hardships early on in life. He never really learned to navigate them or how to solve problems associated with hardship. And he lacked the savvy required to influence people. Oppenheimer, on the other hand, received academic probation for trying to murder his lab instructor when he was at Cambridge. He literally attempted to murder the guy and talked his way out of a criminal charge and into academic probation. This guy grew up in an environment where dealing with people and establishing presence was a daily thing. The difference between Langen and Oppenheimer: Langen never learned how to establish presence or how to influence people. Oppenheimer learned that from a very early age. Langen, by the way, is still alive. He lives in northern Missouri. He makes a living by going on game shows and winning all their money. So leading is also difficult because messaging matters. Persuasion comes from the story. It comes from the narrative. It doesn't come from a list of bullet points. It doesn't come from the facts. And the story is not told in a vacuum. I want you to think in terms of the story being held hostage by the storyteller. The messenger matters. And so how much training have you had in delivering a message? Now, the reason that the facts don't necessarily get you there all by yourself is that it hurts to be wrong. It literally hurts to be wrong. That part of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex that monitors physical pain, lights up when you are proven to be incorrect. Our brain is wired to reject facts that are inconsistent with our own beliefs. And it hurts. Early in the 2000s, a group at U of M figured out that misinformed folks, when exposed to corrected facts, rarely changed their minds. Political partisans were particularly prone to this. When demonstrated to be incorrect, rather than changing their mind, they held more tightly to the thing that was incorrect. So if you want to create people that are well-informed by virtue of the story, attacking their views amounts to attacking who they are. And you can't go there. You have to first disassociate the person from their view. You have to make it okay for them to be wrong. If you were wrong about the banana, what else might you be wrong about? That's how you get there. Precise, frequent reminders of facts will never stand up to the emotion of a good story. Now, facts matter because facts are what people rely on when they explain their positions to others. You know, it's not as though that facts are not important. They are. But facts alone will not compel people to change their mind. So that brings us to the persuasion dilemma. In the persuasion dilemma, if I ask a customer if they're willing to pay more for an enhanced product, I get a response along a bell curve that looks like this. 20% of the respondents on this curve in green on the left want the best, they'll pay for it. 20% on the other hand, don't want to pay a nickel more, they don't care what it means. They're represented right in red. 60% are generally satisfied with the way things are and wonder why you're asking about change. Now, when you ask the same group of people how strongly they feel about their position, you get an inverted curve. It looks like this. And so out here in the ends, you have the people who are the strongest in their opinions. These are the alligators. We call them alligators because they're all mouth and no ears. For those people that are on the ends of this curve, no amount of explanation, no volume of facts, no testimony that you bring from anybody else to the table is going to cause them to move their flag. They are where they are. Those folks in the middle, generally satisfied, but their opinion is very weak. Their commitment to their position, you know, is really not tantamount to their happiness one way or the other. They're not going to get off the sofa. They're not going to write a check. They're not going to come to a meeting. They're not going to write a letter. You know, they're happy with the way things are, and they're likely to remain relatively disengaged. So when you really start breaking down how you are able to persuade people, you have to understand where they fit into this spectrum. So you have folks with opinions that range from very strong to very weak. And you have folks in this example that range from wants more to want less. And you can begin to divide out where people fall. So you'll recall that out there in the ends, you got 20%, right? So in the middle, you got 60%. Now, if I want to compel somebody to change their position, I know I'm not going to get those people on either end. Whether they want more or less, doesn't really matter. If they're out there in the ends, I'm not going to get them to change their mind. And I'm probably not going to get those folks dead center to do very much. So there's about 5% of those guys in the middle. There's about 5% on each end. There's 15% that, you know, just aren't going to move. They just aren't going to move. And you can invest a ton of resources into those folks if you haven't figured out who they are. Now, when you really start breaking down where you can get these folks, this is where the alligators live. They're out here on the ends. You're not going to compel them. This is where the disengaged live. You're not going to compel them. But here's where the magic happens. Where these lines intersect, you have people who are open to being influenced if you can tell a good story. And these are the people that matter. These are the people that matter. Because if you want to get something done that requires, say, a majority of people, if the decision makers in the business or the owners group have to make the decision about whether to go with you or somebody else, for example, they're going to make a decision based on the story that you present. And there are some people in the middle, and there are some people out there in the ends, and there are some people who can be compelled by the story that you've told. 30% of the folks are on each end of this equation. That means only 40% of the people are in the middle. Of that 40%, you can't get 5 because they're not going to be motivated. So there's only 35. If it takes half or better to get something done, you have to have a percentage of those folks in green. You have to figure out where people are on this scale. Are they in the middle? Are they on the ends? Or are they in the green range? If they're in that green range, then you can tell a good story. You can compel them, hopefully, to see things from your perspective. You can help them understand that there's 2 ways to open the bin. So at the end of all of this, with everything that we've talked about today, I would ask you to do a couple of things. Number 1, practice civility and lead with respect and dignity. That's the most important. Number 2, appreciate the differences between leadership and management. They're not the same thing. Number 3, have a good story to tell and be really good at telling it. because the story is held hostage by the storyteller. The fourth one, learn who can and cannot be influenced. And when you get good at that, only use that skill for good, because it can be deployed for nefarious purposes too. And then finally, ask yourself every day, do you have the courage necessary to take responsibility for inventing the future? All right, that's it. That's what I got for you today. We've got a few minutes for questions. We can go from there. All right, any questions? Seeing none, we'll adjourn this meeting and go home. I mean, you tell me.
So what are the tips and tricks, like any magic tips and tricks to get your point across, to tell that story? What if you feel insecure about your storytelling ability?
Practice, practice. There's no magic. Number one, there is absolutely no magic. There's no, I have been told by folks with whom I do this sort of thing that sometimes they enjoy receiving the message. They enjoy hearing the story. They'll say, you're pretty good at doing that. All right. It is not my thing. It is not my thing. Some people get energy from doing this kind of stuff. Some people have to give it. I'm one of those that has to give it, right? It's exhausting for me to, do that sort of thing. So it's all about preparation. It's about knowing what your story is. It's about knowing how to convey it, about what's going to stick. You got to think less about yourself and more about the folks that you're communicating to and what is likely to be important to them. What's important to them. Once you figure that out, then it's just a matter of packaging the story. But there is no magic. It's something that requires a lot of preparation and practice. If you're speaking to a customer or a group for 20 minutes, my rule of thumb is that you should be preparing at least 2 hours. 2 hours for 20 minutes. That's how you get to a story that becomes compelling and you can deliver well. Yeah, that's the magic dust. It's hard work. Yeah. Anything else?
Zoom that has any questions? So as a bunch of young leaders, the future of the leaders in this area, in their businesses, I think a lot of younger professionals struggle with confidence. What can they do? Give me advice on that.
So what do you mean?
How do you go about gaining confidence, especially when you're a young professional and you sort of feel a little new in your business?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of layers and I don't know. I mean, I'm 53 years old. I haven't been young in a long time. I can tell you exactly the moment when I realized I was an old guy. I was teaching a class at Ferris State University, much like this, and there's a clock on the wall at the back of the room. And I'm looking at that clock, and I didn't have a watch on, and realized the clock's not working. And so I said to the folks in the room, can somebody tell me what time it is? Fully expecting somebody to do this. Nobody did that. They all pulled out their phones. And you know what? I had a phone in my pocket. It never dawned on me to look at the phone to figure out what time it was. That's when I knew I was an old guy, right then. But when it comes to confidence, I know it's a real thing. So I've got 4 children who are in their 20s. I work on the board with Self Love Beauty and Lisa Thompson's group, which is, and Kathy does work with them as well, to help young women build their confidence. And I know that's a thing, right? And so I'll tell you, when I started in my professional career, I worked in the public arena. I worked inside the fishbowl. I was 23 years old. I was a department director. I had 4 employees who were like my age. And I had to go to public meetings and explain things to the community and so on and so forth. So I wore a suit every day. Every day. I worked in Coldwater, little town. I was the only guy in City Hall that wore a suit every day. I did that because it lent to me some credibility that, maybe I didn't deserve at that point, but it was one way that I could get people to tune in to what I was talking about versus focusing on the fact that I'm 23 and, have very little experience. And so I think part of it is figuring out what's valued by the folks that you're interacting with and appealing to that value. I'll tell you a story. I did a speaking engagement one time with a group of retirees at a church here in Midland, and it was a potluck. And the youngest person in that group was probably 75, and the age went up from there. And there were maybe 30 people. And so I'm always looking for a way to connect to the audience that I'm speaking with. And in that moment, my presentation was all about taxes and public service and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, what on earth am I going to connect to these people over? I don't know. And so I'm shown to a table, I sit down, we're going to prepare a plate, we'll go through the potluck line, and I'm listening to the conversation around me, trying to figure out what am I going to connect on. And I noticed that folks were talking a lot about the food, mostly about what in couples situations, one of the couples couldn't eat or could eat things they liked or things their doctor told them to stay away from, but it was about the food. And so I came across pickled beets, right? Pickled beets. My mom pickled beets. I grew up on a farm, we grew everything that we ate. My mom pickled beets, right? I hadn't seen pickled beets in 15 years. And I noticed those and I thought, that's it. That's my entry point. So the time comes, I'm introduced, I'm going to talk to the group and I explain to them who I am. And I tell them, look, I grew up on a farm and we grew everything we ate. My mom pickled beets. My mom passed away 6 years ago. I haven't had pickled beets in probably 10 years. And when I ate those pickled beets, it took me back to home with my mom, just like that. At that moment, that room full of folks who are 75 and older were with me. They were with me. We connected and the rest of the story went. And so part of it is how do you build credibility? Part of it is how you connect.
I have a question from somebody on Zoom, from Kelsey. She says, great presentation. My question is, how would one avoid being a micromanager? Or is there a difference at all between general managing and micromanaging?
Well, yeah, of course there's a difference, I would define micromanaging as telling people not only what to be done, but how to do it, right? So there's the what and the how. Presuming the organization you work for has figured out the why, your role is somewhere between the what and the how. The what is managing, the how is micromanaging. Focus on the what. If you've got people that can't figure out the how, then you've got different kinds of issues in the organization and you've got to have better training on the how. I guess I got my back to it. I told you, I apologize in advance for that. It's a little strange, the layout, but yeah, I think it's a division between the what and the how. I'm going to presume that works. Kathy's nodding her head, so we're going to say, yeah, that's a workable answer. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Well, I sincerely appreciate all of you being here today. I hope that there was, of all of this, something that you can take home and deploy today. I think there is. If ever we can be useful to you, don't hesitate to ask. ABC is a tremendous organization that works really hard to help people come along and get better at what they do in this industry. And even though, sometimes we're competitors and sometimes we're partners, we are all in this industry together in Merit Shop. And so it behooves all of us to be outstanding at what we do. So we are at your disposal in that regard. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank everybody for coming. I know there's at least one person that wants a tour of our space, which I would like to for. So if you're interested in that, that for you, or you can stay here, continue networking. But there's more food left. So yeah, thanks again. Look forward to our next event.
Yeah.
What else is new with you, man?
Well, my kids spring break last week, so.
Oh, yeah.
Managing, working.
Figuring out how to get your job done and all that.
We're heading out here for our family vacation. So.
Oh, are you? Okay, nice. Very nice. Hey, I'll catch up to you a little bit later on today. Yeah, give me a call. I have two things. One, I have a customer for you. And secondly, I wanted to ask you about something for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I wanted to be interested in doing a gift basket. So I know you've been talking about getting involved in that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah, I'll give you a call, probably, like, I have to head down to Detroit today. Around 6:30. I'll give you a call.
Yeah, just give me, yeah, that's perfect. Yep. Are you heading back right away?
I was gonna do a quick tour, but we have a meeting at 1:30.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm not
man.
gonna, I'm gonna be on the phone.
On the phone or something?
Yeah.
You might be able to make it. If you want, if you want to do a meeting from here, you can.
I was actually calling on the drive.
In the car, makes sense.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I hear that.
I'm a lot further than I remember. I used to cover when I lived in Midland. I